April 17th, and this is the Transportation and Environment's first committee work session on the FY24 budget, and today we'll be taking up a number of items, including the Transportation General Fund, the Homeowner Association Road Reimbursement NDA, the Rockville Parking District NDA, Vision Zero NDA, and the Climate Response NDA. And we will kick things off with the Transportation General Fund. Dr. Orland, do you have anything to add?
Good morning. I didn't know if you would give the director a chance to make some opening comments or not.
We will certainly do that now.
Sure. I'm happy to go over the recommendations that the executive sent over for the operating budget. A couple of notable items are changes, as noted in the packet, to the facility planning program and some other adjustments to ongoing programs to result in some savings in this program that allowed other priorities to be met, and the packet does a good job of going through those, so I won't delay us with any other comments.
Thank you. All right, just again, before we get started, this just happened. We're going to have 3 work sessions on the committee. We have today's, we have this coming Thursday, we're covering a briefing from WMATA on their approved FY24 operating budget and capital budget, the Mass Transit Fund operating budget, the Parking District operating budget, CIP projects associated with both mass transit and parking, as well as the transportation fees resolution that deal with parking fees and transit fares. And we are still waiting, probably come later this week, perhaps, major amendments on the BRT projects based on the state's actions and changes in those projects. We've just now, I think, scheduled a 3rd meeting, which will be on Monday morning, May 1st at 9:30. The room to be announced. And so with that, let me go into the first item, which, as the Chairman mentioned, is the General Fund. The General Fund is recommended as an increase of 9.1%. Roughly the same percentage increase in terms of personnel costs and operating expense, and the details of their proposals in the packet. There's also what we've done here in this committee, at least the last few years, is there was a consolidation of the programs within the program budgets across the county government, actually, particularly in DOT. And for transparency purposes, we've asked the department and OMB to redo those programs so they fit the programs that existed prior to FY20. So you can see a better comparison between what's being planned, what was approved and worked on this last year versus the following year. And you'll see that crosswalk on Circle 13. Then in terms of the general fund, we're basically looking at the notable additions that the executive is recommending. And the first one, the major one to highlight, is a public safety fence around the perimeter, most of the perimeter of the Wayne Avenue garage in Silver Spring. There's been experience over the last several months, maybe longer than that, where teenagers have gone to the top floor of the building and jumped over a 3-foot gap between the top of the Wayne Avenue garage and the building which sits atop the Majestic Theater and other buildings, businesses along Ellsworth, and causing mayhem and dropping things on the pavement, and of course the danger itself of just jumping across a 3-foot wide gap with a 5-story descent is pretty scary. The police have done as much as they could to try to keep that from happening, but it keeps happening. And so the exec's recommendation, and the police department supports it as well, is to build a fence around that portion of the garage, the top level, to prevent this from happening. The cost estimate is $300,000. The issue I'm raising isn't about the need for the fence or even the cost of the fence. It's really about how should it be charged. The executive is recommending that it be charged against the general fund because it's a general public safety issue. It really has nothing to do with the customers of the parking garage, and that's true. However, the point I would make is that the parking lot districts are basically, they're enterprise funds, and they're treated like a business, that the money that they collect is to be used for specific things within the parking district, and also certain legal requirements in terms of paying back the general fund for overhead types of things like personnel and legal and that sort of thing, as well as transfers to a certain extent to the urban district in Silver Spring. And if this were a private building, then that any mishap that happens, that private building would be liable. And so the parking district would be liable. And so I think it's actually a legitimate expense of the parking lot district itself rather than the general fund. So my recommendation is that we approve the budget for the Silver Spring PLD. And again, you'll be talking about the PLD itself on Thursday, but this is coming up here because it was recommended in the general fund, that this charge not be charged against the general fund, but they be charged against the PLD instead. And you see the numbers on the top of page 3, even with the $300,000 being charged against the PLD, the percentage of remaining reserve at the end of the year compared to next year's operating budget is actually still around 25% or better, which is the goal, which is also a lot better than it has been the last few years. We can see a couple, even last year, in the latter years, and even in FY24, it dropped to single digits, which is scary. So it can absorb this. And so that's my recommendation.
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Orland. So I think it's hard to have this conversation about the PLD and the Silver Spring PLD without getting into the broader context of the PLD on Thursday, because there has been commingling of PLD funds over the last number of years, and I think it would be important to have a conversation, right? Since there have been Silver Spring PLD funds that have been loaned, I think is the proper word, to Bethesda, right? And so let me take a step back and just ask about this issue in general. How prevalent is this jumping? How prevalent is this problem? And I'll yield to the district council member if you have anything you want to say to tee up the question.
I can just say I actually just did a tour of the top of the garage, and as Dr. Orland said, it's quite a jump that these young people are making. And talking to the management at the Regal Theater, it's a nightly issue, particularly as the weather gets nicer, and over the weekends it does get worse. But he said it's pretty much a nightly issue that they have young people up there, and it's been something they've been trying to work with the police department on, but it's very difficult to discourage the behavior. And as Dr. Orland said, there's not only the graffiti and the defacing and the throwing things from building, but the safety concerns for young people jumping from one building to another. So it's a real concern, and we do need to take action.
I could speak to this a little bit. This was not an issue that was prevalent before 2019 or so. It seems to have developed in the last couple of years because the garage and the roof have been there for quite a long time, and there was no real issue with this. In the pandemic and beyond that, it appears that this has become an attractive activity. So a number of steps were taken to try to reduce the occurrence of this. First was increasing the security patrols by the parking security services in that area. That had some effect. The police made more regular visits to the location. That had some of that effect. We have very clear images of the council member and her visit up there because a motion detecting security camera system was installed so that people could respond more quickly when people go beyond the area. This part of the garage is not open on a daily basis. So when people are going into this area, it triggers a response in that area. That has had some effect, but again, has not curtailed the activity to the extent desired. So I think there was general agreement, even though there was some argument about whether this is something that should be taken on or whether the other owner should take some other action to reduce the attractiveness of their rooftop. We reached an agreement that, yes, this is a measure that would reduce it. The cost is determined because it needs to be a cut-proof type fence, so it's not a standard chain link fence, which would very quickly be breached to then allow access to the roof again. And then we had some discussion about why this is needed, and it was determined and agreed in the executive branch that this was principally a public safety measure that should be covered in general fund. And Dr. Orland is right in his analysis that there is a healthy balance shown in the PLD fund, but that is based on very, very significant reductions in the capital program to reflect the significant revenue deficiency that we've had since 2020. So further draw on those funds was not seen as the best balance of how to solve this problem, even though there's a problem that needs to be addressed here. So that's the short story on where we are and why this recommendation was framed the way it is.
So is it possible to split the cost between the PLD and the general fund?
The only, I thought about that, the only thing to then keep in mind, let's say it's 50-50, let's say it's 150,000 each. Then the 150,000 for the general fund would go on the reconciliation list. And if it were not included in the budget, then the 150,000 in the parking district would have to come out as well. It can be done, it's just we have to remember all that. And, you know, it makes it a little more complicated. Again, and I'll be perfectly frank, a lot of this is also, we're also looking for ways of trying to reduce the general fund for purposes of trying not to increase the property tax as much as has been recommended by the executive. So.
Thank you.
So I appreciate Councilmember Stewart sharing her firsthand account of the situation, and Director Conklin providing more insight as well. So I see the merit in needing it clearly from a public safety and nighttime safety, right, issue, which we're dealing with as well. What I would like to propose is we put a pin on this and hold it until Thursday's conversation about the PLD, so we can have a more detailed and enriched conversation about it.
Yeah. In fact, there's more information in the packet that will go out this afternoon about the CIP that the director is referring to, and you can make a more comprehensive decision. Again, the only reason why I brought it up here is because it was proposed as part
No,
of
of course.
But
Very good.
yeah, Thursday makes sense.
Okay.
Okay. The next item for addition from the executive is to increase the funding for inspections of what's called short span bridges. These are smaller bridges, but also culverts. The current budget, FY23, I believe is $120,000, and the exec's recommending increasing it to $150,000. And there's an error in my packet. I said this is a one-time expenditure. The intent here is to increase the level of funding from here on out to $150,000, if not higher, in later years. The maintenance of bridges and culverts is one of the top priorities in infrastructure maintenance and DOT. We have this report that comes out every few years called the Infrastructure Maintenance Task Force Report, and we rank, and these rankings come from the departments themselves, as to what's the most highest priority kind of infrastructure maintenance, and the lower priorities on a scale of 1 to 5, and these are 5s. Because you want to capture the problem early enough and address that. If a bridge fails or culvert fails, then the road has to be closed, and it could be for an extended period, causes a lot of disruption, and of course, you know, if it falls at the wrong time, it could cause a real serious accident. So I'm recommending, of course, adding it to the reconciliation list and giving it a high priority.
Clearly maintaining the quality of our infrastructure is paramount, and as we know that there are more water creating events because of climate change, we need to make sure that the bridges and culverts are properly in order. My question, though, is about whether it is federal or state requirements for inspections. How often are we required to do this work, and how much do we have backlogged in these efforts?
These are bridges that don't qualify under the federal and state programs, so they're generally culverts more than they are bridges. So they're under our inspection regime, and it allows us to identify likely failure before failure occurs, to do this on a more frequent routine basis.
So they are wholly our responsibility.
Yes.
Yep. Added as
You put it that way.
Committee recommendation would be a high priority.
Okay. The next item is an additional amount for maintenance of newly accepted subdivision roads. Every year, there's always a few new subdivisions that get created in the county, and they're creating a slightly higher inventory of roads that then DOT has to maintain. I am recommending adding this to the budget as we typically do, but I would actually only give this just a priority rather than a high priority, if only because, first of all, in that first year or two, there isn't maybe that much maintenance to do to these roads, hopefully. But more importantly, the size of the maintenance program for resurfacing is quite large, and it could probably absorb this $33,000 without being too much of a derogation of the effort. So it should be added. We add this every year, but and again, the mode we're in of trying to find savings, I would have this as a lower priority than the two items above it.
I agree that this should be added to the budget, obviously, as we recommended it should be. These are roads that are coming into the county inventory, and it's not voluntary. We must accept them. They're being built as part of development, and we have an obligation to maintain them once they're in our inventory. The maintenance is more than resurfacing. It's paying attention to the drainage structures on those roads. It's mowing, it's trash, it's a whole variety of services that are provided. And much like any new facility that comes into the county, I think it's the county's responsibility to properly maintain that once we have that. It would be like, this weekend a new library opened. It'd be like not maintaining that library once it opened. This is the same. So I would hope that the committee would consider giving this a higher priority. I think it's a bad precedent to set to start to question whether or not we budget for the maintenance of the infrastructure we've just added to the inventory.
As new roads come into the county's inventory, what is the cost curve, right? When does it start costing more money to maintain those roads? If this is the baseline, that when they first come in, and it's, what is it, $33,000? Is that it?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
an increase.
Right. How far into the life cycle of a road does that 33 then become much more?
The major rehabilitation and long-term preservation activities are covered in CIP projects. This is more the routine maintenance of those facilities so that they stay in good serviceable condition. So it's everything up through crack sealing, and if it goes beyond that, it's in the CIP category. So this is not the major repair category. And I don't know the dollar per mile cost, but there's overall $1 per mile used to estimate the county's inventory costs, and this is based on that number times the number of new roads accepted in the last year.
So when you say up to the cracked sealant, what is that? What are those measures?
Well, crack sealing is when the pavement starts to deteriorate.
No, I know that, but
Everything short of that would be cleaning of drainage structures, mowing on those roads if they have medians.
Mm-hmm.
Some snow removal, but that's covered in the climate NDA. Foliage.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole variety of routine maintenance, but that's covered in this.
so this is tangential, but we're starting to look at the rustic roads master plan.
Yes.
So would the mowing and maintenance of the rustic roads be included in this?
Well, yes, but none of them are obviously new.
Right. No, I just
yes.
in that particular budget.
Yes.
Yeah.
I do want to add something. I may have overstated this a little bit. This does represent the fact that there's more roads, street miles going into the inventory, but it also reflects a certain degree the fact that every other street in the inventory is a year older. And so if you think it's in terms of what's the total cost of maintaining the whole system with this increase, you probably should take into account the fact the other roads are a year older as well. So it's probably not simply the way I stated it first, which is what is the maintenance that's going to happen on these new roads in the first year. But nevertheless, I think because the inventory is so large that something as small as $33,000 could be absorbed and not have much of an impact. It'd be negative, but it wouldn't be much of an impact on.
Well, and that's why I asked about the cost curve, right? Trying to figure out if roads really start needing some TLC in like the 6th or 7th year, right? But before I turn it over to Councilmember Stewart, Director Conklin, you mentioned the cost per mile. So $33,000.
I have to turn to Mr. Dorsey if he's got more detail on that.
Okay. Yeah, just curious about how many new roads that would be able to help maintain.
And just a bit, Richard Dorsey, Division of Highway Services. It just depends on the type of services that are needed. I mean, if we're mowing, if we're cleaning up debris, if we're plowing snow, whatever the maintenance activities are. But it's really difficult to kind of put a dollar value on what the maintenance costs would be unless because we're a responsive organization, and you just can't, you don't know what you're going to respond to until it shows up.
Understood. Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. I appreciate the conversation, and I would support making this a high priority moving forward. Just because, as you said, we're getting new roads, it's our responsibility, and I think as we go through the reconciliation, it's going to be tough. And maintaining our basic services and our infrastructure is a high priority for me. And so I'd like to, I thank Dr. Erlin for his analysis, but I'd like to move this to a high priority.
I'm comfortable moving it to a high priority, but I'll state for the record that I would, like another metric regarding the cost per mile for this type of work. I guess maybe in general, but even in the future, if you can relay for new roads, that would be helpful.
Councilmember Glass, just to give an idea, we could try to put that together, but when this money is added to the budget, it gets distributed over many different line items: the mowing program, the signing program, the pavement marking program, the shoulder program, the vegetation program. So I don't recall if we have a maintenance cost per mile in the infrastructure maintenance task force report. There's a section for operating costs, but I think it may already be distributed. We're just going to need to do a little bit of work to pull it all back together.
So all of that is very helpful. So to further facilitate this question, answering this question, what is in general the cost of maintaining roads in Montgomery County on a per mile basis? Do we know that off the top? Okay. Right. I mean, that's the central question here. Okay. Thank you.
So it's unanimous to go to high priority, is that right?
Sure.
Okay. One of the issues that the council has raised already, I think as a whole, is the number of vacancies in county government. And so we received, all of us analysts received from OMB a detailed listing of the vacant positions as of March 1st, and we're to report to each committee what each of the funds are showing in the way of vacant positions and their budgeted costs for FY24, and what is the total amount, not only the total amount of those, but also how many of those positions, or how much money is tied up with positions that have been vacant for 2 or more years or for 1 or more years. You see the chart on page 4. I want to point out an error. The last 2 lines of that table, I had the years reversed. The first of those, that $785,000 figure, is the total cost of vacant positions that have been vacant for 2 or more years, and the $1.3 million are the total of those positions that have been vacant for 1 or more years, of course, including the amount that's 2 or more years. The total amount of money that is tied up with vacant positions is $5.6 million. We're talking about 80 budgeted positions, which are not filled. And 20 of those positions have been vacant for over 1 year, and 11 of those vacant for over 2 years. Now, the way that departments reflect that in their budgets is to include a lapse assumption, which is basically the amount of money that is budgeted for positions which they don't expect they're going to spend. And the recommended the lapse that's recommended by the executive in the general fund is $2.1 million, and so that leaves $3.5 million that's budgeted for positions that are intended to be filled in FY24. I don't have a recommendation about this. I think, and then there's been some concern when I reviewed this with the department about the validity of the list that we received, or there may be some, some things they need to explain about it. So this would be the opportunity to have a little bit of a discussion about that.
So let me just use this as an opportunity to say that the budget the county executive introduced is a big budget, and it is predicated on a number of things, including a 10% property tax increase that funds MCPS, which means that the surplus from the reserves and natural increases in revenue fund the rest of the general operating budget. I have also publicly said and privately to the county executive that I wanted to work with him on transforming county government and streamlining county government. And I think that looking at these vacancies across county government, which range between 1,200 and 1,500, depending on who is asked within the executive branch and depending on the day, I think those are places to start that conversation, trying to figure out how we better utilize county taxpayer resources and streamlining county government. And so I am favorable right now to fully eliminating some of these positions that clearly have been vacant in some instances for more than a year and more than 2 years. I'm speaking to the utility of those positions. But to the point that Dr. Orland just made, and I think it's a really important one, while there are lapse savings in the budget, as there are every year, there's still other savings that have occurred because of unfilled positions. So what happens to those funds from other unfilled positions?
Yeah, we have not actually realized the savings that this might indicate lives in the budget, and there's a number of reasons for that. Principally, the services that these folks would have provided are delivered by others through overtime, principally. So there's some level of budgeted overtime reflected in the budget for things that are known, like bus operators, for example, have built-in overtime in their schedules. When our ranks of bus operators are thin, there's overtime above and beyond that budgeted overtime. So that consumes a portion of this. We see that occur also in a significant way in storm response. There's some level of overtime, again, assumed in the highway services budget, but that organization is also understaffed. So we see the budgeted allocation to that activity can support a certain amount of overtime that then doesn't show up as a storm, wind and rain, snow supplemental. So those supplementals would be larger if the position budgets weren't carried. Another element of how that potential savings is consumed is through the use of contractors to provide services that we don't have county employees available to perform. And again, you can see that in the Highway Services Organization. There's a certain baseline assumed that we have available. If we don't have that available, the gap can be filled by contractors. That happens in other places in the organization as well. And then there are some more technical reasons why the savings doesn't show up in the bottom line. Things like you're assuming in the budget that as a position goes vacant, it resets to a lower pay rate, but in reality, the people that you're able to recruit are not at that rate, so that savings doesn't materialize. So by and large, over the last several years, and I think the vacancies have been relatively consistent over the last several years, we have not at the end of each year seen the personnel savings result that you might expect because the services were still provided through other mechanisms like the ones that I described.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that response, and clearly employment economics makes sense, right? I think that there are questions out there in the public that have been relayed to me about, and this is not specific to DOT, this is government in general, that when there are cost savings, usually because of lapsed positions, mostly because of lapsed positions, that at the end of the fiscal year, departments go on a spending spree. And that departments then start hiring contractors for work, start buying, some swag or whatever other things just to spend the money and draw down on it. And so trying to figure out what funds are actually saved and how to reduce that so that we can reduce the overall burden is where I'm trying to go.
To that specific question that you've received, if that budget is not available, it doesn't return to us at the end of the year to use for whatever purposes. And generally, if there is surplus at the end of the year, we tend to use it on increasing the amount of maintenance activities that are done. Adding another neighborhood to the paving cycle, things like that, if we have surplus. But if it's budgeted to not be available, then it doesn't become available to us at the end of the year.
I appreciate the.
Well, one of the things that happens, at least in the transportation budget, you're familiar with it over the last several years, is we come in for an end-of-year supplemental budget request as it relates to storm response. So reducing the personnel cost will actually result in that supplemental request being higher, because any savings that we do realize there end up reducing that amount of supplemental. It will pay for whatever overtime due to storm response first, and then it ends up bringing a certain number over to the council. Again, eliminate that personnel cost, and that supplemental is likely higher request every year.
You're teasing a conversation that will happen, although I presume it'll probably be a very small, if existent, supplemental this year.
I think we're actually about netted out. While we did not have much snow, we did activate several times. You're paying those personnel, refilling salt domars. I think we applied salt once or twice. 300 ton for the season. So some activity went out in preparation, but generally speaking, all those activations were, there's very small budget between what's in our base budget and what's also in the storm response NDA that you'll talk about following on here, but really that level of initial activation really is what that money covers, typical of this year. But you get any snow, that snow request supplemental is coming over at the end of the year.
Thank you. So I think this is our first look at these vacancies, and it's going to be a big discussion over the next 4 or 5 weeks. So I think that I understand the premise that the work has to get done, and so whether it's overtime or contractors, the work still needs to be done. I'm really uncomfortable having positions. I mean, some of these positions are 8-9 years, right? According to the chart in the packet. So can we look at if it makes more sense to have contractors do the work, or if it makes more sense not having somebody full-time and having the overtime fill the gap, can you restructure the budget to reflect what really is happening? Because when we look at this, it really does look like we've got these positions that are just hanging out there. And I understand that the whole world is having trouble recruiting and retaining staff, but a lot of these positions have been open pre-COVID, and even if the world gets back to normal, I don't know if you'll be able to recruit 80 vacant positions in the next year. And so I'm just not comfortable. I don't have any reassurance that these positions are going to be filled in the next year. And it just doesn't feel like it's close to what really is happening.
I think you touched on some of the factors that create this condition, the difficulty in hiring. We don't have it now, but we have had hiring freezes multiple times during the tenure of these vacant positions that really make that challenging. There are also some factors that make this a little bit misleading, and again, we're not 100% certain about that these positions represent the positions. But for example, the manager 3, which is the very top line, we have hired many manager 3s during the last 10 years, but oftentimes you've hired one that's replaced one, and we didn't pick the oldest one to fill. So that's a little bit misleading. There's churn in the organization that sometimes a position gets left out of that cycle, so it looks like it never was needed. But in fact, there were hires in that category over time. Mr. Lannon has more detail on that for sure.
Well, one of the things that, again, may be unique in DOT compared to a lot of other departments, a lot of our positions are split between the general fund and the capital programs. over the last several years, and I think you go back through Dr. Orland's package, you'll see the transportation capital program was declining over time. And so we kept positions vacant because the work wasn't there. Within the last 2 years, we've had an explosion of transportation capital projects through the infusion of a lot of state money. We did not add positions. Some of this will be reactivating some of those positions. That manager position there, that's probably about 80% to the capital budget. So we may have kept it frozen for a while, but now we're getting into all the BRT program, trying to staff up accordingly to deliver those projects on schedule, and we would refill some of those positions. Again, just, without a lot of details, there's a deputy director on here that shows almost 1,200 days. I've been in the position for quite some time now. The other one just went vacant in September. So that 1,200 days is incorrect. We're not sure how some of this data is coming around, but some of these positions, again, not all are associated. There's a small component in the general fund, the other part in the capital budget. So you're seeing things of that nature. Public service crafts worker, the positions were frozen. There's no money associated with those. They reflect in the lapse. We've committed to go back with OMB as we complete the budget and clean up a lot of these positions. Yes, we do have some things out there that need to be cleaned up and restructured, but I would always advocate, if you look at the personnel costs in and of themselves, there's all these other activities that hit against the budget. Unbudgeted leave payout that averages for us $150,000 a year when people separate and we have to pay out all of their leave. Overtime numbers have not been adjusted probably in the 30 years that I've been associated with budgeting. We're using, they never get moved, and you absorb those costs. We fund or we staff special events. There's no funding for those kind of things. So it's, you can't look at these things on a line item type basis. You got to look at the total of the personnel cost and the operating expenses and the crossover between those and expenditures.
Thank you. And I think that that's one of the requests that we have to clean that up. And I think the point that you're making is the point that I'm making. The budget really should reflect what's necessary, because I know that, for instance, the overtime and the leave payouts, right? That's going to happen every year, and so let's have a budget that reflects that, and because that way we can, when we look at budget to actual, we can see, okay, well, that makes sense, that overtime makes sense, or that payout makes sense. I would just like to see the budget closer to reality.
Thank you for this. I think it's very helpful. Government operations on Friday afternoon started digging into this issue of vacancies as well, and as with many things, it's a more complex picture sometimes. And I would just like to echo my colleague, Councilmember Balcom, to say, as much as we can get closer as we're making these decisions in the budget, it would be very helpful. Friday afternoon, HR Director Anderson was before the GO committee, and, she said at the moment we have about, we're advertising of over about 500 positions. But on our books, we say we have 1,500 vacancies. So it's looking at that disconnect, and that's not all you all. But it is, I think, for us looking at those vacancies and really trying to understand what it means, because the other point I want to make is that it's important for this year's budget, but as we go through and look at compensation for our staff and look at what that's going to mean moving forward, these conversations in terms of what positions we're filling, how many staff we have, are really important to think about what we can afford as a government. So I appreciate the effort to kind of look at these, work with OMB, and come back to us maybe with better numbers.
Yeah, go ahead.
I also think, as I said, this is the first one we're looking at, and we'll be looking at many more. I think it's really important, and Dr. Orland, the idea that it's not as cut and dry as how long these positions are open. The first example that you made is a really good example of when you fill a position, you're not necessarily looking at it from this perspective, but when we look at it, it looks like this has been open for 10 years, when in reality, a manager position is currently open and it's been on the books for 10 years. So I think that that's a really important nuance that we need to make sure that we understand.
I will note that the deputy director position that's been vacant on paper for more than 1,000 days did strike me as suspect as I'm looking at one of the deputy directors now. No, I'm not foreshadowing anything. But Dr. Orland, where did this information come from?
It came from OMB. Craig Howard got the entire list of the entire county government from his counterpart at management budget.
Got it. So as Councilmember Stewart, as chair of the GO committee, noted, and she and I spoke since the Friday work session, and I look forward to the follow-up work sessions there that she's going to have. This is complex, but I think it is critically important to restructuring county government, being more realistic in our budget forecasting. So I know we delayed the conversation about the fencing for the Wayne Avenue parking garage. My preference would be to hold this conversation as well, or quite possibly even ask the department, and I'll open this up for conversation, for some non-recommended cuts. You know, how would you prioritize these positions, recognizing that we might not be able to keep all of them, and you knowing the details far better than we? Is that something you would be able to provide us, such as we do with capital budgets for other?
Obviously, we would have to coordinate with OMB and the executive to provide that kind of information. Otherwise, we're representing the budget that's been recommended.
I understand. And so, I throw this out for everybody who's following, particularly colleagues who are in the council, that this is a recommended budget from the county executive, and you all know your departments and agencies far better than we do. And as has been noted specifically in this conversation, there might be some confusion. There is some confusion or discrepancy with regard to the information that OMB has provided us and what the departments themselves are telling us. So perhaps we, in turn, ask you for some non-recommended priorities, and maybe this is something we ask all other agencies and departments to do when they come before the council to help better inform us.
Could I suggest two possible revisions to what you just said, but it's in the same direction?
Sure.
One is that it be a generic request of OMB for all departments, not just this fund.
Yes,
You'll
that is
see, and
what I'm asking.
You'll see, and in your council presidency, you can do that. The other thing is that, and you'll see the same kind of analysis for the transit fund in the packets going out this afternoon, so it'd be good. The other thing was that maybe you carve it down to maybe just those positions that are vacant for more than a year. So the ones that are at least are vacant now but less than a year, you don't think of touching those. But the ones that are vacant for more than a year, look for non-recommended reductions there.
I'm open to that suggestion. However, we're able to streamline it and ease the process on your end to make it clearer.
I think a global issue, and I don't know if this is for this discussion or the GO discussion. I think that absolutely, if a position is open less than a year, there's just a different level of scrutiny. However, the sheer number of open positions, even if it's less than a year, what is the reality? What is the likelihood that all of those positions are going to be filled? And so I think that, and I'm not talking about getting rid of them, but maybe the lapse is different. If we're looking at 60 positions, is that realistic? And I don't know, I mean, is that realistic to hire 60 people in the next 12 months?
Sort of depends on the department, because DOT replaces bus drivers a lot, and I would imagine some of the workers in the field and highway services probably happens fairly often. The higher level positions, not so much.
Yeah, I think, again, the director of HR talked about how, given the start of this fiscal year in July, we have hired, I think she said it was over 300 people, and we have lost 300 people. So it's, when you look at the numbers, she's like, we added and then we subtracted to that overall number. So I think that's also just an important point I had not thought about that she raised as well. And I think for probably a department like DOT, I don't want to assume, but I'm thinking you probably may see more of that than some other departments. So.
Yeah, I mean, the constant churn
Yeah.
is hard to stop and take a clear look at what's happening. But as we try to look at this budget, and this being the first day for this committee,
I have one more
that
suggestion.
information would be helpful. Yeah.
I have one more suggestion about timing. It's going to take them some time to do this, plus the meeting on Thursday is pretty full as it is. So I'm suggesting maybe we come back to this on May 1st rather than on Thursday. It gives more, give more time to, which means we'd have to have the results by, say, the middle of the week before. So it gives you about 8 or 9 days.
I'll just say I'm not sure unilaterally as a department how we take this on, so we'll have to have some conversation.
Sure, I mean, just talk amongst yourselves, but in terms of the committee's work, think about not doing this on Thursday, but think about doing it on May 1st instead.
I'm just concerned about the magnitude of the effort to dig into a lot of this stuff and get that done in, within 2 weeks.
Do the best you can.
Let me ask for a little clarification on the magnitude of the work so that we all are on the same page as to what we're asking. What do you think we're asking?
To go through each of the positions that have been there more than a year, vacant more than a year, and try to figure out the history of why they are. I just my familiarity with the budget, some of these things I know are quite complex. They've been frozen positions, they've been held for a number of reasons, the complexity with the capital budget. Not to go back in this conversation, but one of the things we do when every position goes vacant, we do an assessment to see what we want to retool that for. DOT has restructured a number of positions outside the budget. Over time, you have not seen a massive uptick in requests for new positions for pedestrian and bicycle safety. We kind of self-created those, reclassified those within our department. We're constantly looking at resourcing those positions, the programs that need the assistance. Again, right now, I think that a lot of these vacancies, if we don't need them where they're at, they should be going over to the capital side because of the explosion of work that we've had there. That will cause charges or shifts in charges between general fund and capital budget. But generally speaking, with that state aid that we've received, significant state aid, those type of positions can be funded instead of going out and relying on contractors, consultants that are going to be more costly in the short term.
So I'll turn it over to Councilmember Stewart in a second, but I think what you just shared is enlightening. It's the first time in this conversation that you're referring to, the influx in state and federal funds that some of these positions might need to be repositioned to accommodate that work. And so that's the first time we're hearing about that, right? And so that in itself is restructuring, which is the goal that many of us are trying to work toward. Why are we only hearing about that now, that vision towards restructuring? Because that's central to this entire conversation.
I think that's a larger discussion outside of the DOT. I can assure you, we look at positions, we move positions around between our divisions, reallocate positions to the task at hand. So I don't know, this is probably better towards
And I agree with
HR.
that is much larger than DOT. We are fortunate to have the chair of the GO committee who's been sharing her insight with the director of human resources as well. And I started this conversation by talking about my public and private conversations with the county executive. And so you're hearing us wanting to make this happen. And we need willing partners in order to do so. And if the executive branch is not willing to do so, we're working towards that.
I think part of the reason you haven't heard that before is that's not a normal part of the budget assembly process. That's kind of strategic activity that happens separate from looking at, the baseline budget, additions and subtractions to meet priorities and the new budget. But while that's going on, departments, I don't know if others do, but I know we always try to reassess whether the positions we have are being used to the best capacity they can. And then, as Emil mentioned, looking at the influx of non-county funds. Right now, we're dealing with all of that through contractors because we don't have the county positions lined up to do that. But that is an activity that we'd like to wean ourselves back off the level of contract support we have and cover that more with county staff, and some of these positions would be used for that type of realignment.
Thank you for that. So I don't know if my colleagues are, I'm less interested in the history versus the moving forward. Sure. So if it's digging into the history of some of these positions that have been open for a long time, I'm kind of less interested in that. And given your point that some of these may be moved around, I'm more interested in, at this point, given the workload you all have in front of you, what are we looking to the future? What positions do you need? And so I think that would be helpful for us.
But also the reality of we have 80 open positions. What is the reality of having a net hire of 80 positions in the next 12 months?
Have we clarified? Okay.
I think so, yes.
Thank you.
Gary Nalvin, OMB. Just want to point out the recommended budget does include some planning lapse savings. It's around $2.1 million for DOT General Fund. Also, our uniform approach for some of the larger departments this year in the recommended budget was to assume some additional lapse savings, assuming that half of the vacant positions that had been vacant for a year or longer would not be filled in FY24, and that is included as one of the budget reductions for DOT.
Thank you for that. Okay, so we'll put a pin in this conversation. Okay.
Before we leave the general fund, we did receive a memo this morning from Councilmember Mink regarding the preventive maintenance resurfacing that's done by the department. I put the memo in front of you on your desk, and the department has it. Mr. Dorsey and Mr. Conklin have it, and I think it would be a good time for them to respond to the questions that she's raised.
You may or may not be aware, but there was some repaving in the Woodmore and Indian Spring neighborhoods over the Easter holidays, NCPS spring break, and I have the good fortune of Richard Dorsey was acting director during that period, so he can kind of give you some sense of what generated that inquiry and how the notifications typically happen for these maintenance activities.
Good morning again. So back several weeks ago, we had commenced a slurry seal project. That's preventive maintenance. And notifications went out. And typically when we send out the newsletters to the community, we'll have a date range. Unfortunately, during the review of the draft, it just said the spring. So the project commenced the Friday before spring break. Folk were going away for the holidays, and there was a lot of discussion going on around through the community, and you may have heard some of it. But we followed up, and the towing issue was resolved. But nevertheless, we did overlook some value information for the community. But typically, when the newsletters go out, we get some feedback from both council members and the executive branch and the residents, and it's usually nothing to be alarmed about. But the letter came out from Mink's office, and I think we've had a number of conversations with her aides, David Hondowitz, and he posed a few questions of concern. And I'll go back in history a little. So in past budget cycles, we would provide the council a list of planned projects for all of our CIP programs, whether it's primary arterial, residential resurfacing, concrete, or the operating budget slurry seal program or street tree preservations. And it would have the PDFs in and all the budget and all the schedules. Well, over the last few budget cycles, we weren't distributing that information to the council members. The former executive and director of DOT didn't feel that it was necessary. And now I see, us kind of going backwards in time where there's a lot of new faces, a lot of new people, and we need to provide a little more in-depth details on what we're doing and when we're doing it in the community. So we will default back to, providing you schedules of our projects. But we do provide that information on our website. So if you go to DOT website, it'll list the projects for, the spring construction season and the winter construction season.
Well, I appreciate Councilmember Mink for sharing this memo, and Mr. Dorsey, your commitment to sharing that information with the council members. I think that's the right direction to go in. I am not surprised by the confusion about the Four Corners and Indian Spring areas. I'm very well acquainted with those communities, and so that there was some confusion, but as long as we're doing a course correction and what's old is new again and sharing that information, I think that would be very helpful.
Yes, thank you. And I think that these are great questions that perhaps maybe after the budget, we have a briefing that just kind of goes over how the preventive maintenance happens, and then also the direct communication when a project happens. I follow y'all on Twitter. It's really helpful, but it would also be great to just get an update. We just had the paving of West Willard Road. I found out about it on Twitter, but it'd be great to have a direct communication.
You want to share with everybody the Twitter handle?
I could probably do it. Go ahead. But thank you.
There you go. That's right. Yeah.
No, I would just say, I think on the preventative maintenance piece, I imagine you all, and we can get in more depth on this, again, my experience in Tacoma Park, we looked at our roads, we had years out of what was, being fine. I can't remember the exact technical words right now, but I imagine we're doing something like that in the county, and it would be helpful to make sure, because again, I'm just going to emphasize, I am a strong believer in making sure that even during tough years, we are investing in our infrastructure, and roads are a safety issue, and I want to make sure that we're continuing, even if we're calling it preventative, there's a reason we do preventative. And so if you, Ms. Strauss, if you wanted to speak to that.
So we have a real robust pavement management system. We have all the data. We annually, every 2 years, we're evaluating some portion of our network. So, for instance, primary arterials, pavement assessments being done right now. Next year, we'll do the residential roads, and that process spits out a lot of data. It gives us the distresses of the pavement and recommendations on the repair strategies based on the funding levels for those particular road networks. So we'll be happy to share, our data with you and let you understand how we select projects and, what the conditions of the whole network is within Montgomery County.
I know we want to move on, but the only other thing about it is there is a multi-year program for each of these. We typically don't publish the out years because the funding availability may not match what's in the modeling, and the project needs may not match the expectations. So oftentimes, as things get further out in that, we're less certain that we're actually going to do that work in the time frame we're saying. So we try to keep it focused on the 12 to 18-month projects that are imminent.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. Next item is the leaf vacuuming fund. The recommendation here is to increase the The budget about 5.6%. The annual charge for a single-family house would go up by $5. It's a 4% increase. And there's a nominal charge for multifamily units as well in those places where the department actually does collect the leaves. That they don't do it for all of them. Obviously, some buildings have their own leaf collection activity. It would increase by 18 cents, which is all about a 4% increase. Actually, the public hearing on this, on the solid waste fees, is tomorrow, but we usually don't get testimony on that. But my recommendations concur with the executive on this.
Great.
Okay. Then the next part of the packet has to do with amendments to the CIP, but I think this is probably a good time as any to take up the council president's memo, which is in the addendum regarding the annual sidewalk program. And there are certain questions that were raised to the department, and this would be, I think, a good time for this discussion to happen.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Orlin, for highlighting the memo that I wrote. And the origin of the memo is in working with communities over the last number of years to try and install sidewalks. There are clearly communities that want them, and there are some communities where a majority of residents don't want them. And then there are some projects that have come to my attention where no one knows who requested the sidewalk, but it seems that a third party, an observer of sorts, has requested it upon seeing the lack of sidewalks in a particular neighborhood. And all of that is to say that there are certainly communities that want sidewalks but are so far down in the queue. And so how do we elevate them where there's no debate, there's no acrimony, and if we have funds for them, let's deploy them. And so that's the question that was essentially asked in the memo.
I'm going to ask Acting Division Chief Maricela Cordova to speak to this. She's overseeing the sidewalk program and has expressed her immense joy working on this program and all of the warm feelings that come to her from various groups wanting sidewalks.
Some are really warm, actually. Maricela Cordova, MCDOT. Good morning. So yes, these sidewalk projects are contentious at best. Some people want them, some people don't. It's usually 50-50. It's a huge issue for the communities because it turns into something that divides the community even. You know, neighbors stop liking each other. They start fighting. Anyway, we did set out last year to try to come up with a better system, an automated system to receive requests and to make it more transparent and to make it easier for residents and for organizations or entities who requested sidewalks to see where their requests were and how they were, moving through the queue. As we were doing that, we realized that was done actually, by the way, on time last year. But as we were doing that, we realized that a more comprehensive automated system that did more than just request was necessary. So as we completed that, we actually decided to start the development of another 2 applications. And so now we have 3 applications that talk to each other. One of them is the request. The other one is an editor prioritization application, and the other one is a field study application. And then the 3 of them are already talking to each other and generating information and data and linked for a more comprehensive system. We have tested that internally, and we are finalizing some of the development, some of the programming that the GIS layers involve, and hopefully we will do a final testing in a couple weeks, and it'll be ready next month. That's our intention right now. I think it'll be a really good way for people to see not only, like I said, the requests that came in, but how everything is moving. Part of this, your question was about prioritization, and part of this prioritization it's not really, so we receive requests and we go out, we don't just put them on a list of things to do. We go out to the field and we verify the conditions, we validate the request, and we make sure that they're feasible. We go through, sorry, looking through my notes, I have that somewhere in here. We look through the pedestrian generators. These are, for example, schools, churches, community centers, all of those parks, paths, bus stops, transit related facilities, and all of that plays into is the sidewalk feasible and necessary or not. It's not just a request-based program. It's actually more of a safety. It's a big issue as well. It's more of a need and justified need. And then yes, once we decide that something is feasible and that it's necessary, it gets put on the queue. Based on these generators, pedestrian generators, we do sometimes prioritize things before others. For example, if we had two requests and one was next to 4 schools and the other one was not, it was just next to a community center, we would probably prioritize the ones that are schools and related to kids and that kind of thing. So, like I said, it's different things, not just the list.
That is very helpful. I'm glad to hear about the prioritization internally, at least, because I agree with that assessment. Not every sidewalk facilitates the same kind of movement, and we want to make sure that kids are safe and that other certain activities, recognizing also that our equity emphasis areas
Right.
also have higher pedestrian usage usually, and a higher likelihood of incidents as well. So we want to help mitigate that and make sure that we are protecting as many people with these resources as possible. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, so we have a rating system for all of these things. For example, a public or a private school will receive 5 points per school. So, we start putting weights to the different things, and that pretty much, excuse me, provides a rating for the project. And then that's also how we prioritize it. So
This is very helpful information. I did not know.
These will get
before,
better.
so.
Just so you know, this will get a lot better with our GIS system. So we're really very excited about it and looking forward to showing it to everyone.
I'm looking forward to learning more.
Thank you. This sounds really exciting and will be useful. How are communities being communicated to who already have started the process?
So, well, it's a public process, of course, and as we design and move things through the queue and through the project development, we do public hearings. So, we put together all these materials and all the information about the sidewalk, the impacts, which is critical for the communities.
Maybe I misspoke. People who may have already put, like, as you're doing this new system, if a group has already put a request in, how does that impact their request?
Right now, it hasn't. It has not impacted anyone. We're still working with our old system and just testing this one. I am not sure, honestly, how we're going to deal with existing requests and the new system. I'm not sure. I'll have to talk to the programmers and see if we're going to just put them in the system. I would assume that we should do that. But we do receive 300 requests per year, so it's a big load.
Great. Well, that sounds exciting. If there's anything that we can do to help coordinate in our offices where requests have pushed through, please let us know, because we hear too about the sidewalk.
Thank you. We actually appreciate the support. Thank you.
Yep.
Good. Thank you. We look forward to getting that update at a later time. Thank you.
Okay, now we go to the CIP. About on page 4, top page 5, the first 3 projects are purely technical. There's some land sale proceeds that have become available, and so the executive is recommending supplanting some GO bond funding for land sales. That this is in the residential and rural road rehabilitation project, the resurfacing residential rural roads project, and the sidewalk and curb replacement project. His recommendations here don't change the scope or the total funding by year. It just strictly changes the color of the money. So recommend approval of those.
Without objection?
Okay, the next item is kind of item that you should be familiar with by now. The executive is recommending delaying the MacArthur Boulevard phase, this next phase of the project, which is to reconstruct the bikeway between Oberlin Avenue and Glen Echo to the DC line. It's already been delayed a couple times in the past. He's recommending delaying it another year and a half. It's supposed to start construction early next year, and he would defer it until a year and a half after that. So, and I'm recommending not approving this amendment. It's typical to the recommendation made back on March 20th on 7 or 8 other projects.
Director Conklin, any?
And strictly done for fiscal reasons.
Yeah, this is a fiscal deferral, and Dr. Orland summarized the reasons for it.
So this is the second round of reductions.
Yeah, these are the March 15th amendments that we got.
Right. Just level setting so everyone understands. And so second round of reductions were requested by the county executive within the Department of Transportation, within MCPS, and within Montgomery College as well. And so while the first round might have had non-recommended, I guess these are even further non-recommended, but in order to make it balanced, something has to happen. So, Director, Dr. Orland, this is the only item that is. Oh no, there's Bowie Mill. Yeah, we're working through that. Sorry.
It's the only further item that's recommending for deferral beyond what those that he'd recommended back in January.
And I'm looking at the PDF. What is the total amount here?
It doesn't change the 6-year total. It moves the money from earlier in the CIP to later. If you look in Circle 19, which I'm turning to as well. Again, construction was to start in FY24. You see that's zeroed out now, and the money is starting in sort of late FY25 and finishing in FY26. Before it had started in mid FY24, and I believe it was finished in FY25. So it delays the. Again, it's an overall. It's a 18-month delay.
Alex? I'm not sure what I just heard from colleagues.
I'm following the recommendation from staff.
There you go. Yes. Thank you. I too concur with staff recommendation. This again, these are commitments, and we'll have to do the reconciliation process to figure out how this all works. But we concur unanimously with staff recommendation.
Okay, the next two projects, Mr. Conklin had referred to this in his opening remarks, are to the two facility planning projects for roads and for pedestrian facilities and bikeways. These are the studies that are done that lead to projects that are in the CIP, standalone projects for construction. And in the pedestrian facilities and bikeways facility planning projects, recommending several changes. First of all, adding money to plan for street area improvements on Woodmont Avenue in Bethesda and Newell Street in Silver Spring and Price and Elkins Avenues in Wheaton. Reduce the funding for three studies that are already in the project. MacArthur Boulevard Bikeway, a different phase than the one we just talked about. This is the phase from the Beltway up to Old Anglers Inn. And Middlebrook Road, Wisteria Drive, and Germantown, and Capitol View Avenue, Metropolitan Avenue. He's reducing the funding, but they have a new process for actually doing facility planning, which they believe can be done more quickly and less costly. So they still will be working on these projects. It just won't need as much money as what has been showing in the CIP. Then there are three other projects which were in the facility planning project as approved by the council last May, which has been overturned by events, and that developers are going to be going forward with these projects. Great Seneca Shared Use Path, Westlake Rock Springs Complete Streets, and another portion of the Capitol View Avenue, Metropolitan Avenue sidewalk. And finally, there are only two which are actually deferring funds. One is the Grosvenor Lane side path, which I believe had been programmed towards the back end of the CIP, like in for years 27, 28, and this would go beyond FY 28. And the same is true with the Goshen Road ped bike improvements. It's a net reduction of $1,810,000. It's in current revenue, but just because it's current revenue doesn't mean it's still something we have to reconcile. So it's an improvement in that respect in terms of trying to make the CIP balance. And then in terms of the roads facility planning project, there are just two changes there. There's the, again, this new streamlined process makes it so that the Parkland Drive Nicholson Lane study in White Flint can be done that way rather than having to do a special study for it, a full-blown facility planning study. But also then removing the 355 bypass project in Clarksburg from the program in anticipation that whatever they work on now might be out of date given the update to the Clarksburg master plan, which is coming up. Those changes result in a change of $920,000 again in current revenue. And I'm recommending all these changes, concurring with the executive all these changes.
I personally, I will concur with your recommendation and appreciate the department wanting to add funding to the streeteries, which we've been hearing a lot about as the weather continues to get better and nicer, and that we don't fully revert back to a pre-pandemic norm. So maintain some of these outdoor activities on DOT roads.
No, I would agree, and I just have one clarification on the deferrals on, not the deferrals, sorry, the projects where we talked about that would be conducted by the developers. We know that for certain. That's not speculation.
Say that again.
We had three projects: Great Seneca Shared Use Paths, Waste Lake, Rock Springs, and Capitol View Metropolitan Avenue sidewalk, a portion of that. Dr. Erlin said that was now being done by developers. I just wanted to know if we had
That's what I've heard.
promises, or is this speculation?
They are ones that are in the development approval process at various stages. The first one is under construction currently. I'm not exactly sure of the status of the other two development projects for Westlake and for Capitol View. We can certainly get that information to you, but it's our expectation that because they're somehow linked to a development that's in the development review and approval process, that's why we've categorized them this way. There was one in the transit component too that I'm not sure what happened to it, but there was one there that's in the next budget and the next packet that is being built as part of the Hillendale Gateway. So when a development activity has overtaken our progress, we've put them in this category.
Perfect. Just wanted to clarify. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. How much money is being added to the streeteries program?
Greg Bruno, OMB, $600,000 for 3 different streeteries.
Okay. Thank you. I support the streetery projects. I think they're important. I think that they add to our community. But we have been talking about funding that happened during COVID for purposes of COVID, and the question of whether now that COVID is essentially over, theoretically over, whether we would have incurred those costs, whether they fit into our budget. So I would just like to be cognizant of that as we move forward, because that may be a cost that we can't absorb.
Yeah, what the studies are looking at, and there's a lot of good information on the DOT's website, is looking at several different options of how to reconstruct these parts of the street. For example, on Woodmont Avenue, on Norfolk Avenue. That is one of them, right?
It's not changed.
That's not changed. Okay. Well, is they're looking at ways of maybe narrowing the street and putting more space for tables and such, but not necessarily closing it altogether. There's an option, I think, to close it altogether. In some cases, there's options to leave the street open but not have parking there. So there are various different options they're looking at right now, but they're doing this in a more streamlined way. And the hope is that by the next budget, that could be actually a capital project that could be recommended in the next CIP.
I can give information on the three of these if you're interested. On the Wheaton Streetery, it's still being established through the use of construction barricades and other temporary equipment. And the intent of this phase of activity is to work with the Wheaton community to figure out what a long-term configuration in terms of the materials and the allocation of space would be for that. For the Woodmont Avenue one, that was a full closure of the road using construction materials. We worked with the Urban Partnership to reconfigure that with opening of the bike facility into a planter designated area. There's interest in making a permanent configuration there. So again, this is a design process with the community on that would be. And then Newell Street didn't have a streetery component, but was community space adjacent to Acorn Park. That one was opened, and we committed to the community that we would close it on a request-based program, and that we would also look at, are there ways to reconfigure Newell Street in that area so that when it is closed, it is a better functioning extension of the park, and can the closure happen with less deployment of resources each time it's needed? So do we install some sort of permanent gate system there so that it can be done more routinely and effectively? And again, we committed to the community to look at those issues. So that's really what's envisioned with these three efforts. But they did grow from COVID, but it appeared that there was a long-term benefit from having them in the beyond the COVID period.
I'm trying to channel Councilmember Balcom, and will say that over the last number of years, there had been lots of conversations about getting the streetery up in Germantown, outside of Black Rock, and possibly a few other places. And there were some logistical challenges, and quite frankly, also some of the restaurants didn't want to participate in the way that other communities were. So it's not right. There is no omission because of lack of trying.
But thank you for channeling me. However, that wasn't my issue.
Okay, good.
Just the issue of, we've had this discussion in full council about carrying on post-COVID projects that we might need to think a little bit more on. And so I think that the study is important. I just don't want to fund things without having a serious discussion about whether the budget can bear it.
Point well taken. That is the lens through which we're looking at this entire FY24 budget. And so I appreciate you highlighting it, and I appreciate the context in which the department is using these funds so that they're not necessarily ongoing operational funds in the future, but trying to find some balance. Okay, great.
So committee recommendation on these two projects?
Yep. We're good.
Okay, the next project is Bowie Mill Road Bikeway. A little bit of history on this one. Last year, the council ultimately approved keeping it on the current schedule that had been in the approved CIP the year before, which would have design start in FY24 and the project completed 6 years later in the end of FY29. We'd gotten $1.5 million of this $20+ million project from the state on the behest of then Delegate Eric Lutke, and there was some consternation that the project had not been accelerated as a result of that. Basically, an agreement was worked out so that last fall, Mr. Glass will recall, it was before Ms. Balcom and Ms. Stewart was on the council. Last fall, the council approved a CIP amendment which accelerated the start of design by about 6 months. So, in fact, design has now started. It started in FY23. But the construction funds were not accelerated because, one, we didn't know how fast the design was really going to proceed, and which would allow the whole schedule to move forward. And two, the project had about $7.8 million, had $7,801,000 beyond 6 years, and the concern was if the project was accelerated, it would compete directly with probably higher priority projects in the CIP, schools to name one big one. And so what's happened since then is the General Assembly approved an additional $6.3 million in terms of an authorization for FY24 and pre-authorizations for 25 and 26. So now the state has, I'd say, 99.9% committed to $7.8 million, which is only $1,000 different than what had been beyond the 6 years. And because the design has started 6 months earlier, we can probably finish the project 6 months earlier. So what you see now is a PDF on circles 25 and 26, particularly circle 25, which I guess you really can't tell from these numbers, but what it would do is complete the project still beyond 6 years, but it would be in the late fall of 2028 rather than in the late spring of 2029. And so that's my recommendation as to how to deal with this. The other thing you'll notice, you don't see the before and after here, but the state aid now totals $7.8 million as opposed to only 1.5. So this actually saves us another $6.3 million in the 6 year period, which is a plus when we're trying to cut down a $207 million overage.
So, Dr. Orland, that was a really good recap of the history of the Bowie Mill Bikeway, and I just want to give a shout out to Senator Craig Zucker and former Delegate Eric Ludke, who really carried the water and helped bring some more state funding to get this over the goal line, recognizing that we were having some difficulties here and that this is a shared project that we all want to get done. So I support staff recommendation on this.
Yep.
Great.
Well, the last thing in this packet is one of the things we want to include in every packet is the racial equity and social justice questions and answers that the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice have received. They're attached on circles 27 and 38 and have included all of the reports, all three funds, not just the general fund here. And in all cases, it shows it gave the department a high score of 3. I think it goes all the way up to 4 is the possibility, but 3 is pretty high. And quoting them, it demonstrates a strong commitment to advancing racial equity and social justice in Montgomery County. I just want to make one sort of additional comment. The questions that were provided, so thus the answers were provided, are really more about training within the departments and about outreach. I haven't seen anything yet on whether the programs themselves are addressing racial equity and social justice. We see it in the reports that are done on supplementals and on bills, but the large part of the budget is not covered, and that really ought to get going, maybe next year. About 3 years ago, when this first came up, we did sort of analysis between DOT and myself about one sub-program within DOT, which was one that Mr. Dorsey referred to. Is he still here? There he is. About the residential resurfacing. And he mentioned to you earlier that, again, every 2 years they look at every road in the county that are in a residential area to see whether or not what the pavement condition is. What we found was that in the year that we looked, the preponderance of the work that was being done was in areas that were not equity emphasis areas, which said to me that, in fact, the problems, there's not a racial equity issue because the work's being done, as it turns out, in the racial equity areas first. They don't need to have the work. And we can look at that information every year and see whether or not that matches up. But, for example, there's some other programs, and I have no reason to believe there's an issue here, but, for example, stump removal, which we're way behind on. Stump removal tends to get done by request. And so it's who calls and how long ago they called that gets the grease, gets the work done. My theory is that you hear that more from areas that are not equity emphasis areas than in equity emphasis areas because it's not necessarily a big emphasis within people who live in equity emphasis areas. But nevertheless, it probably means that more stumps, that's just my theory, is being replaced in areas that are not in equity emphasis areas. And there's just been no work done in this area that I know of. And I'm hoping for the next budget, we actually get serious about looking at that kind of thing across county government, and not just looking. And it's good. It's a good starting point looking at process, training within the department, outreach to people to try to get more feedback from BIPOC communities. But the actual program itself, we don't have that much information on them yet. So, again, that's a sort of editorial comment for the future.
Thank you for those final thoughts on this part of our conversation, and I think we're all good. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next, the next packet is the NDA. The first is the Climate Response NDA, which used to be called the Snow Removal and Storm Cleanup NDA, which is really what it is. And all this is just a block of money in addition to what's already budgeted in DOT, which is a minimal amount, to address not just snow removal, but also storm cleanup. Some years, actually, the biggest costs happen right about now in the spring. When one year, several years ago, was a big tornado that came through the lower part of the county. A huge amount of costs there. We've frozen that 2.884990 figure for the last 13 years. We've never changed it. And you can almost put any number you want in there because most years, this year might be an exception, we exceed it by quite a bit. But it's like the Fram oil filter commercial. You either pay me now or you pay me later. If you put more money in this budget, it means it's less flexibility in creating your budget, but it does help the supplemental for next year. I'm not recommending any changes, but that's the genesis of that 288,84990 is back in 2010 when this went in. If you added that to what was in DOT's budget, it ended up being a round number. Well, it hasn't been that way for 13 years, but anyway. Recommending approval of that. I'll just keep going unless there's comments you want to make. Homeowners Association Roads non-departmental account. There's actually two sub-programs here. This was started in the late 80s. There was a law that was passed by the council which said that the executive is supposed to recommend in his budget the amount of money per mile that HOAs should receive in a grant from the county for the maintenance of their roads. And it's not just every road within an HOA, but it's those that basically are, they kind of look-alikes to county roads. So, for example, Montgomery Village has a ton of roads which are maintained by the Montgomery Village Foundation, which look like county roads, but they're not. In addition to that, I should say that program was fully funded in 1990. From 1991 through the middle part of the aughts, it was funded at maybe a quarter of what that cost was, because, again, the council was not required to pay to fund what the formula had recommended. They did it based on what they felt like they could afford. And really, since FY10, it's not been funded at all. So the last 13 years, it's not been funded. I made this comment a few years ago. It was fought back by the foundation, from Montgomery Village Foundation, hoping to keep hope alive. But frankly, I don't think the council will ever approve money under the county program, because we've gone through fat times and lean times in the budget. Still hasn't approved any money for that part of the program. Now, there is a second program called the state program, which basically identifies certain roads that are eligible for highway user funds from the state's allocation, and that continues. And of course, that's really what this budget is about now. So it's a total of assumed to be $62,089, which is actually the same as last year. And again, what that is an appropriation that the county would make for money that we will receive from the state and highway user revenue, which then would be passed on to the foundation. We're talking mostly about the Montgomery Village Foundation. I think there may be one or two other HOAs which have a small number of roads. It's mainly MVF. And so I am recommending approval. I'm recommending approval of the executive's recommendation on both of these things. But I'm just making the comment that I think to clean up the code, it would be best just to get rid of that part of the code which requires the executive to make this recommendation, which he hasn't done. Mr. Elrich has never done it. Mr. Leggett never did it. And Mr. Duncan, I don't think, ever did it. Starting in 1994, I don't think he did it. So they've been in breach for 13 years, whatever. No, it's 25 years. going back a number of years, and the council hasn't approved money in the last 13. So just something to put on the table. So again, the short answer is, sorry for going on, is recommending approval of the executive's recommendation for that.
Just a question, the 62,000 is there state revenue shown elsewhere in the budget for that, or is?
When we get the highway user revenue money, that is showing up in the fiscal plan for general fund. Of that, $62,089 will then get granted to, mostly again to Montgomery Village Foundation. I think one or two others, small amounts.
And then, thank you. And then, so have we had complaints about this or pushback from the HOAs on this, or they
The only
just
pushback
accepted
came
it?
about 3 years ago when I recommended the bill, and the council actually introduced the bill, and then my foundation showed up and said, "Don't do it. Keep hope alive. One of these days you'll fund it."
Yeah, that's
And
exactly.
It hasn't happened, of course, since.
Okay, thank you.
To quote Ted Kennedy, "The dream shall never die." Okay. Without objection? Yep.
The next is the Rockville Parking District. This was an agreement between the city and, based on MOU between the city and the county and the council, again, many years ago, the late aughts, I believe, where when they built the town center, the agreement is that the county would pay for the cost of free parking for Montgomery, for Rockville Library employees, county employees in Rockville Library, but also help pay for the debt service having to do with that garage. It's based on a formula, and there are three parts to the formula. The annual debt service payment is unchanged, $180,000. The charge for Rockville Library employee parking is unchanged as well. But there's also a payment of lieu in taxes, which is slightly higher. It's $2,400 higher than last year, according to the formula. And so the exec's recommendation is to increase it by $2,400. And again, because this is a formula, it's part of the MOU between the city and the county. I'm recommending approval.
Without objection?
The next is the Vision Zero NDA, and Wade Holland is here. Why don't you come up, Wade? There are two changes here. One is to address the compensation increase, basically is salary and benefits and the cost of living increase for him. But there's also $100,000 more in operating expenses for the, I'm going to mispronounce it, La Abuelina, say that right? Roadway Safety Campaign. And the description that they provided to me is in the middle of page 3, but actually Wade is here to talk about that if you'd like to explore this with him.
Yeah, Mr. Holland, welcome. A number of us saw you last week at an important street safety event organized by the Council of Governments. And so I think a pretty good jumping off point in telling us what you've been up to over the last year.
Yeah, well, good morning. Thank you for having me. And again, thank you for coming out and supporting us at the Council of Governments Street Smart Kickoff. So what we're going to proposing for FY24, this $100,000, if you're familiar with what was going on during the COVID-19 pandemic, a great program that was started by the Latino Health Initiative and a coalition of community partners was one of the strategies. A part of that multi-pronged approach was creating a set of characters, the main character being a grandmother called La Abuelina, and now they've expanded to about 4 characters. So it's a grandmother, grandfather, and then a grandson, and granddaughter. The idea would be to use those characters that we've already created and the county owns and use those characters as part of our overall traffic safety. It's not just pedestrian safety as well. So within FY23, the part of the Vision Zero NDA is paying for what we call kind of a test run of the La Abuelina characters. We're going to use the set of characters, and we just kicked this off, so we're still in like the development phase of a smaller campaign to do outreach about our newer pedestrian hybrid beacons that have been installed around the county, focus on drivers' use of stopping for pedestrians that are using the crosswalks there, and also for the pedestrians to know how to use the new beacons. And we have built into that contract some evaluation criteria too to see how it actually works for 23. Going into 24, we take that feedback we got from the 23 program and then say, lessons learned, where can we use this for other areas where drivers don't yield to pedestrians, speeding, child protection, seats, as well as seatbelt safety, some of these common things we know that lead to serious and fatal crashes.
Thank you for that. And Clearly, I know that the Abuelita program won national awards for our COVID safety strategy and for having vaccination rates among the Latino community higher than any other demographic here in the county. And so clearly, I know the folks behind that and the county staff as well have been doing some really, really good work. With regard to the nearly $150,000 operating cost, is that all towards that campaign, or how do you see that being divided?
Yeah, so the additional FY24, the 100,000 would be for La Abuelina. We have the additional 50K, it's basically the base budget. So in the past, we've used that for, basically it supplements my role in terms of contractor support. So in the past, I've had, paid interns that are contractors, helping with some of the base research, helping with outreach. We've used that money for outreach as well in terms of, purchasing bike lights for Bike Month, which is coming up in May. We've had also contractors to help with facilitation. When we rebuild our Vision Zero plans, we have regular check-ins on the Vision Zero action plan. We'll have contractors support for facilitation, community outreach. So that kind of keeps that budget available to kind of supplement my role in terms of contractor support for that roughly $50,000 in the operating, and then the $100,000 would pay for the expansion of the La Abuelina campaign.
Yeah, I should clarify. I'm recommending that the $100,000 be added to the reconciliation list as a high priority, but not the salary increase. That's something that's handled by the GO committee and the council sets separately. So that would be the recommendation, is putting the $100,000 on the rec list as a high priority.
We're all in agreement without objection.
Thank you.
And we're done.
And we're done for now, but I appreciate DOT staff for the conversation, and if there's any need for any clarity regarding the follow-up information that we've requested, don't hesitate to reach out. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all. We're adjourned.